Good morning, everybody.
Hello.
This is May 20th, and this is episode, you got to put it up, 36, Churches in the Pandemic.
Right. And in exponential growth, we're way above, we're in the billions an episode.
Yeah,
20
36
billion. Yeah,
nice.
That'd be really big.
That's huge. More than the stars in the sky. So for those who don't know us, Dan and I will introduce ourselves and then we'll introduce our guest. I'm Mark Van Steenwyk. I'm the director for the Center for Prophetic Imagination.
And I'm Daniel Wolpert. I direct MICA, the Minnesota Institute of Contemplation and Healing. And yes, we're very excited. We have another guest. I love when we have our guests. And so this is my dear friend and colleague. And Sherill is coming to us from Alabama, where it's cold. Right? Which
60-something.
Yeah, 60-something. They're all freezing down there. They're getting their dog sleds out, getting ready to go. Yes, the Reverend Sherill Clontz. And Sherill, why don't you introduce yourself? And then she's going to kick off our topic. We're going to be looking at how churches are functioning in the pandemic.
Oh, yes. So, good morning. My name is Sherill Clontz. I'm the superintendent of the Chehaw District of the North Alabama Conference of the United Methodist Church. Nice big title there.
That's a lot.
We're not going to put down below. For those who don't know, a district superintendent in the United Methodist Church is an extension of the bishop. And works with the bishop in strategic planning. In fact, another big title for district superintendent is chief missional strategist for the district. Yeah. It actually has that baseball hat with that on there. And also we work along with the bishop in overseeing, supervising, and assisting and resourcing our churches and our pastors within our districts. So my district's Chehaw District, which I don't know how much you know about Alabama, but I-20 runs from Birmingham to the Georgia state line, and my district runs on either side of it. And probably the most famous thing I could tell you about my district is probably the very middle of it is the infield of the Talladega Raceway.
There we go.
We have to work meetings around the race, the Iron Bowl, and Alabama and Auburn football. But
and you also have the highest point in Alabama in your district, right?
Chehaw District. The Chehaw Mountain is the highest point in Alabama, and technically it's not in my district, but you can see it from so many places within the district that they named it after that.
Okay, that's kind of like seeing Russia from your backyard.
No, you really can see it, I promise. But there's not any churches out there anyway, so
it's just the mountain.
It's just the mountain. So it's a very diverse, because we have the suburbs of Birmingham to some very rural areas, that are very close to Atlanta. So it's it's pretty diverse.
Right. Yeah, that was actually one thing when I was just down there that and it's funny about localized geography. Like, even if you have a sense of sort of big geography, sometimes not really clear about localized geography. And I always forget how close to Atlanta you are, right? I mean, it really, we talked about it a little bit, it does feel like you're going to be an Atlanta suburb sort of sooner rather than later.
It's at least on the east side of the district.
Yeah. So one of the big things that you do is provide a lot of leadership and support for pastors. And maybe just talk a little bit about, from your perspective, what it's been like for pastors during this pandemic, and especially in a lot of these smaller churches.
Well, it's been crazy for the pastors. They've had to completely retool. From going from never even considering being online to providing some sort of online presence, even in some of the smaller churches. And they've really had to think that through. It's like some of them will not do Facebook, so they do YouTube Live. YouTube. Some of our churches, though, don't even have really good internet or cell coverage. And so I got pastors mailing sermons out. And so it's deeply contextual. Having to teach 80-year-olds how to use Zoom. And it's been a blessing for those who have, because they're able to have their small groups, they're able to worship with their congregations. But it's a whole new game for them. Every time I do a Zoom meeting with leadership in the district, somebody's on Zoom for the very first time, or somebody's on, just learning about YouTube or Facebook. And of course, the small membership churches in my area are in areas that have not been impacted much by the virus at all. And so they're very frustrated and don't understand the fact that we've requested a suspension of in-person services through at least June 1st, because in their areas, they've just not seen the impact of it. And they're like, we're less than 10 people. And I'll go, you're all over 65. So it's been, they'll probably be the first to open up, but there's just lots of new questions that they're having to ask. And how can they also still remain in ministry to those that are not ready or not able to return to in-person worship? For the larger churches, talking about how we're going to do children's ministry and youth ministry when even our schools are closed. So, and how to do it safely. We talk a lot in our Methodist tradition about the 3 general rules, which are do no harm, do all the good you can, and stay in love with God. And in all of this, all 3 of those things are a great tension. How can we do no harm and do good, and still worship and study and pray together? So, on the other hand, it's been like this tremendous thing where these churches are reaching people they've never reached before. Geographic boundaries go away. Unchurched folks who are kind of scared to walk in the building don't mind watching a YouTube video or a Facebook Live. And so in some ways, we're more accessible than we've ever been.
Right.
So it's been a mixed blessing and a lot of learning for pastors and churches.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So it right. I mean, when the shock of all this hit, you then have this tremendous effort expended to kind of retool and reorient. And as you said, the learning curve and just the effort expended on learning all these new things, is tremendous, right? And exhausting and stressful. Right, but then you also start to discover these interesting opportunities, right? Yeah, I mean, I've talked to so many pastors who are like, oh my gosh, our worship attendance has quadrupled, right? And now these people from all over the country are watching me online and, coming to join us, and people that used to be part of our community but have moved, now they're coming back to church online. And so starting to kind of discover this whole new landscape that we're a part of.
There's a church that I was going to do a retreat with before the pandemic hit, and so we've been following up about doing a retreat online over 3 evenings instead of like one day. And the church is predominantly over 70, and it's been amazing to see them all pretty much handle the transition. You didn't need to figure out this technology before. Now you do. And so it's interesting to see that adds a whole another tool in the arsenal, for lack of a better term. But also it just isn't as good as when you're in person. So it seems like there's a little bit of an opportunity here for people to realize more possibilities for ways to engage.
Well, one of the things we're discovering, because I'm in the process now of introducing pastors who will be coming in July to their congregations by Zoom. And it's more effective and cheaper because I'm not traveling all over the place. But what I found about Zoom is it works really well if you've already built relationship with people. It's a hard way to build relationship. So in introducing pastors to congregations by Zoom, and they don't know stories, and they're not, the internet might not be good, and they can't even really see them, and it's just very, very different. So there's tremendous opportunities, like for instance, to scale back in the cost of my work, and me not having to travel for every meeting I've got to have with a church. or even with the cabinet and the bishop, to the fact that there's just some work you can't do as well this way.
Mhm.
Especially if it requires a lot of trust and a lot of relational capital.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something, I mean, I've been doing online spiritual direction and psychotherapy for a long time. I mean, I was sort of one of the real early adopters of a lot of this. And that was one thing that I very much noticed early on. Like if I had met the person in person, you know, even once, that made the transition to the online thing much easier. It was a lot harder meeting brand new people online for the first time. And so I can certainly imagine we're talking about a whole community.
Yeah.
And as you said, you know, and then you've got all the technical issues, right? I mean, the first time you're getting on, people are like, you know, it's just like, it make you crazy. But,
and these are new skills for the pastors as well. I was noticing one of the comments over here that said this pastor felt like she was working harder than any time in her 20 years.
Yeah, I'm a retired UM pastor serving 2 small rural churches part-time. I'm working harder than at any time throughout my 30 years of service.
And I have found that to be true. And one of the things I'm concerned about now, this far into this, which for us is about 2 months into the suspension, is that the pastors are getting tired. One of them will say, I don't think my congregation is going to understand that once we get back to in-person worship, I'm going to have to go, it's time for a vacation. You know, but they're, because they're getting worn out, because nothing is by rote. How you do pastoral care is different now than it was 3 months ago. I mean, even, you can't just go into the hospital and check on somebody. So everything they do, they have to think through, what is the best way to do this? And how am I going to do it and do it well? You know, that's led to some wonderful things. Some of my larger churches are getting the laity much more involved in a lot of things, which should have happened before, but it's forcing it now. And, but it's just tiring.
Right. Yeah. And that's something that I've really seen as well. And one of the things that, you know, and I've been very, very directive with a number of people who were planning on taking vacations during this time and who were then going to cancel their vacations. And I'm saying, like, no, you have to take your vacation. And I do think that this whole issue of, right, how do I create boundaries around my work when now that I'm at home and I can turn on my computer at any time and I can, you know, start prepping for something anytime. You know, that's part of the skill of this new normal is, because working 24/7 is not viable or sustainable.
That's one of the things that I'm also a spiritual director, and I've done a lot of online stuff. And I think one of the things that makes it easier for me than if I were doing pastoral care is you learn in spiritual direction, if you train that way, that you meet once a month for 1 hour, and then this is the sort of things you might do. And so it's a container that's easy to port over.
Yeah.
But when you have a much more relational flow, just putting that in the little box is difficult. And there's other things that tend to flow. Like I've been thinking about, you know, pastoral care and visitation is harder, but different. But then what does it mean to be missional or prophetic in a time when you have to rely on digital formats to do that, which we all know about. Internet activism has its limits. And so the idea of being internet missional or internet prophetic, this seems to be limited. So it's a big question.
And I think related to that is using online tools, whether you're doing a Bible study by Facebook Live or YouTube or whatever, there's a tendency for it to be one way without dialogue. And even when you have chat like we've got here, it's still hard to interact with that. And so, I think some of the hard prophetic work we've got to do and the hard missional work we've got to do requires relation. So it's a little hard to figure out how you, in this venue, this media, do that.
Yeah, so let's throw up Colin's comments here.
It's a great comment. Colin writes, I must admit my fascination with the recent dispensations within Catholic circles regarding communion and reconciliation, recommending spiritual communion and, to quote Pope Francis, taking one's sins directly to God. The Lutherans had a well-earned field day with that. That's right.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
by the way,
and there have been a lot of fast issue of communion, right? Is doing community communion online real, right?
Mm-hmm.
There have been a lot of stuff about that. Then there's this Catholic priest. I think he's become an internet meme sensation. I don't know if you've seen this, but he's all gowned up and he's got a mask and a face guard. And people are driving by and he's got a little spritz bottle full of holy water and he's like squirting people through the windows with holy water. Yeah, I mean, it's really sort of upended also all of these liturgical, theological, communal principles and practices. It's just been very fascinating.
We've had a lot of discussions about the sacraments. And I don't know if you know, there's been one United Methodist bishop that said, go ahead, do it online. And then went, oh no, I made a mistake. Don't. And you know, it's hard. And then I've got a pastor I was talking with yesterday who's wanting to baptize 2 young men before he leaves because he's going to a new appointment. So wait until after this passes is not an option if he's going to baptize them. But the liturgical part, the promises the congregation makes in response to the person being baptized, really important to him. So we were kind of talking through what are some of the ways you can do that and still be safe and still allow the congregation to interact. Mm-hmm. But it's hard. I mean, I've chosen that until the body of Christ can gather again, that I'm not taking communion. But I have a lovely picture of my 2-year-old grandson dipping the bread in his cup with his pastor while on online service. So, and both speak to me.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and that's great, you know, because that comment that you just made, because what I love about that is that, you know, this time, if we can embrace this, is forcing us to be very open and flexible, mm-hmm. right? And, you know, and I think Colin's comment gets to that too, right? I mean, even across the Catholic Protestant divide, you know, is there some flexibility with some of these things? But, you know, but then of course there's some folks that react to that differently and don't want to be flexible. But, you know, I guess to me, this issue of being prophetic, you know, what are maybe some of the things that you're seeing about how some of these either communities, pastors, lay people, I mean, what are some of the things that maybe you're noticing about how they're talking about being different in the world as a result of this?
Yeah, there's been a number of things, and one of the problems I think is because pastors are so busy that we've really not had enough time to process theologically what all's happening. We're responding, and not being proactive at this point, and that's part of why they need a vacation. They need some time just to stop and think. Some of the things that I'm seeing is awareness of those who are left out. So we are worried about the 80, 70, and 90-year-olds who don't have internet, don't have a smartphone, and we're not able to reach out to like we can our other folks. We're worried about our youth and children, particularly those that are not in safe homes. One of the big questions we've been kind of grappling with this week is recovery ministries. Mm-hmm. You know, what's the worst thing that can happen to them, that they're exposed to this virus or that they go back into their addictions or they're suicidal? And so how do you address those issues? And I think, and then of course, there's more people hungry in need of food. And and when I go walking around my neighborhood, I see more homeless out right now than I did 2 months ago. And so how do we do that when we're social distancing? So I see that. I see trying to respond to what's to me seems like a simple thing, wearing masks. In our culture down here, where many people are very suspicious of it. So to talk about Christian liberty what that means. That, it may be lawful, but should I do it? I may think it's useless, but should I do it? Those are important things. I think we're going to see a whole lot related to consumerism and economy and the civil religion that predominates, that we're going to have to struggle with as we look at what does it look like on the other side of this.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, those are all really great points. And we've got a couple long comments or questions here.
Dorinda writes, and when we open, it will not be all at once. Wondering if we will not be having two communities, those who come physically and those who will still stay quarantined. Plus, how do we ask pastors who may not be comfortable going out yet, hold both and all together will be a challenge.
Absolutely. We have we're working with a phased in approach. So once the suspension's lifted, we're talking groups of 10, then 25, then 50, then 100, then 250. And some of our churches won't hold 250. I mean, that's also the truth. But we also know there are people that are not going to choose to, for various reasons, to be there. And some of them, we don't want them to be there because they're at risk. And so for many, this is going to be one of the challenges for pastors, is that balance between how do I do really good in-person embodied worship and how do I still continue my online or my podcasting or my whatever it was I was doing to reach the folks who can't be there. It really will be almost two congregations.
Couple more questions. Yeah, they're coming in now.
They're coming in fast and furious. That's great.
Kathleen writes, considering the decline of the UMC, and other bodies too, I am concerned that many more churches will close because of the pandemic. Can we really survive months or years of not gathering for public worship?
Yeah.
I mean, we've already seen, like, every day I look at the newspaper to see which of our restaurants and bars have closed, and those function like communal places for a lot of people. And so I feel like that's going to be the similar kind of thing that happens with churches.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Let's just roll a couple more of these comments and questions.
Colin writes, do any of you think this will change church culture with regard to church streaming permanently, much like telehealth, experiences of long distance community in the midst of this lately? And then I'll just throw the last comment up and then we'll just handle them all together. Attention already there, but now exasperated, is that while some yearn for community, others simply want their religious transaction. Am I here to dispense services to individuals or lead a community? The dominant refrain from the leadership in my community is please everybody, i.e. provide a religious service so that our institution can survive. Right. There's a lot of nothing in those comments.
And I think Nathan is exasperated, but he probably means exacerbated. So that was a great Freudian slip there, Nathan. It may be both.
I think both.
Yeah.
Because I think one of the gifts of this time is that we needed to change, and this is forcing change. Mm-hmm. And that includes finding really redefining what it means to be the church, because we've been way too focused on 1 hour in one building at one time doing things by rote, with plug and chug worship, where we put in our hymns at a certain place and our liturgy at a certain place. And honestly, I've been around to a lot of churches. Our contemporary worship is even worse about that, because you have X number of songs and then a certain amount of preaching and a prayer, and I mean, you can almost guarantee when you walk in what the rhythm will be. So I see more variety in traditional worship. But then, I have churches that sing from the heavenly highways and shake notes. But I think it's helping us to redefine that. One of the conversations we've had in our district is that the church open the doors and see all the people. In our case, we close the doors and now we're seeing the people. Mm. We teach kids the church is not the building, right? We're learning that now. And for some churches aren't going to learn it, and I think those are the ones that won't survive this. But whether those little churches are pretty resilient, it always kind of amazes me. And some of them have really adapted to this. Some have not. The same thing with some of our medium-sized and large churches. And I think that's going to have more to do with whether they survive this than how long we're closed.
Yeah, and I think I think Colin's point about a lot of people are not going to come back. Because I do. We've talked about this a lot in relation to different topics about this whole pressure to go back, right, to normal. And I think a lot of pastors and a lot of churches are going to be really surprised when there's the option of in-person public worship, when suddenly there are a lot of folks that are like, you know what, I like sitting at home and being online. I like not having to drive a long period of time to get to church. I like connecting with a larger geographic group of people. And I think Nathan's point about this whole issue of consumerism versus community is enormous because, right, I mean, going totally online can exacerbate that consumerism, right? So now I can just go to any church in the country, right? They're all online, and I can just pick the one that, I like. But then what really is my community? I mean, what are the things that nourish me and help me? And and then when you're talking about all the issues you brought up, Sherill, about, hunger and housing and safety and education, I mean, those are community functions. Those aren't consumerist functions. And we're really seeing that we're going to be very pressed to figure out how to deal with a lot of those in different ways.
Hey, one of the things that we're encouraging our churches to do is to poll their congregations. As a small congregation, call them, bigger congregation, do a formal poll and find out what they're thinking, what their anxieties are, if they're ready to come back. And this has been a kind of a surprise for a lot of our pastors, because one of the stressors right now for in our area anyway is that you got really loud people that don't understand why Walmart is open and they can't go to church. And then you got the people that are scared, and they're getting it from both ends. And so when they've started doing these polls, what they're finding out is most people are not ready to come back. If we open the doors wide open, they're not coming back, not yet.
Right.
There is a yearning, though, I think, for embodied worship that wasn't there. I mean, it's just like this whole communion thing. Communion was our least attended Sunday. And all of a sudden, it's the most important thing people want to talk about. So I think that there's some yearnings that are coming out of this that are good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Colin writes, excellent point about reorienting what we conceive of as the church in this moment. That paradigm really needed to shift to persons over buildings. And this is part of the thing. Like this, to me, presents an opportunity to maybe reframe it to the people rather than even the institution. But there's also a way to reframe it as now you're a content delivery service offering webinars, trying to increase your brand. Like that's a lot of the online stuff. If you look up how to do online technology things, you get a lot of commercials and advertisements for people about increasing your brand. And that's tends to be the dominant mode that people have engaged things like this in.
Yeah, but I think that your comment, Sherill, a bit ago about because we've been so busy, we've not taken the time to do the theological reflection, and that's always the case in a crisis, right? So you go into crisis mode, and you're just shipping boxes, shipping food, seeing people are safe, doing all that kind of stuff. In this case, everybody becoming the web expert. And you're not taking time to reflect. And I do feel like, as we move forward in this, because, this is going to be a long haul of all kinds. I really do hope that we're very intentional about taking that reflection time. And pastors, groups, leaders like yourself, saying, okay, look, however we organize that, whether that's like online retreats or whatever works well, to say, what, we need to take some time apart and talk about what is actually happening here and where are we headed, what have we learned, what are we noticing? Because without that, you just keep rolling, trying to survive and be reactive, and that's fine sometimes, but at a certain point, that's not the best way to go.
Pretty much at the end of our time, but there's one last question maybe I can throw up. Answer it in 15 seconds or less. Kathleen writes, before this happened, the big discussion in the UMC, United Methodist Church, was how to split. I'm wondering how this will affect General Conference.
Right, we didn't even mention that.
That was the big news before all this hit, yeah.
And I was saying on Sunday, I was supposed to meet with the district and talk about the results of General Conference and how it impacted us, and of course we didn't. What I'm seeing is a renewed focus on the mission that kind of gets above that debate. And what I'm hoping, I don't think that's going away. You know, I live in a very traditionalist area. I don't think it's going to go away, but I'm hoping we'll be kinder to one another by having this cooling off period and this time of reflecting about what's the most important thing we do as a church.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a great, hopeful note to end on. So, Sherill, thanks so much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Good to meet you.
Again, love all the comments. We've got a great crew that come in with great comments and questions. So, thank you all for listening, and we'll be back tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Bye.